Unit 10, Lecture 1D, Space Race. All right, so in 1956, the Soviets successfully launched the first man-made satellite, Sputnik. It goes around the Earth, orbits the Earth, and it just goes beep, beep, beep. That's it. But it's hugely important. It's a milestone. We couldn't do it. It makes us question our abilities and our system, all right? It forces President Eisenhower to take a look at U.S. educational system and refocus it. Now we're going to pay more attention to math and science, all right? JFK is going to look at the space race as a hugely important thing. We're going to create NASA, and he's going to promise to launch and put a man on the moon before anybody else, because we're missing milestones. They've hit benchmarks before us. They're the first to put a man in space, all right? Some people you need to know from the space race, real important. John Glenn's the first American to orbit the Earth. Neil Armstrong is the first man on the moon, okay? He has that very famous quote, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." I remember Sally Ride. She'll be our first female U.S. astronaut, okay? Now, also, Eisenhower, as part of containment, adopts a policy of massive retaliation. So in order to deter, prevent, or discourage any nuclear attack by the Soviet Union, Eisenhower says if anybody launches anything, anybody commits any act of aggression, the United States will launch an all-out military action. We're going to launch all of ours. You launch one missile, we'll launch every one we have. All right, which will lead to this idea of MAD, M-A-D, mutually assured destruction. Eventually, if you launch one missile, we launch all of ours, everybody dies, and it'll help keep the peace, this fear of massive death. All right, now in the late 50s, early 60s, the Cold War is going to shift focus and be a lot of tension on Cuba, an island 90 miles off the coast of Florida. In 1959, Fidel Castro led a communist revolution that took over Cuba, and many Cubans fled to Florida to escape communist rule. So President Eisenhower encouraged the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, to develop a secret plan to overthrow Castro. The CIA is our agency for espionage and spying, okay? So they decided to train and equip a group of anti-communist Cuban exiles who were living in the United States, and with the United States assistance, this force would sail from Nicaragua, that's important for some reason, all right, and would land at the Bay of Pigs, remember Bay of Pigs, on the Cuban coast, and lead the Cuban people in an uprising against Castro. They feel there'd be a massive uprising of people in general support to overthrow the communist dictator Fidel Castro. So JFK enters office in '61. He approves the CIA's plan to go ahead with the Bay of Pigs invasion, and it's a complete disaster. All right, the Bay of Pigs, the popular uprising against Castro never happens, and within 2 days, Castro's army has captured or killed most of the American invaders. All right. In 1962, it takes even a more serious turn in Cuba when President Kennedy learns the Soviet Union placed nuclear missiles there. We're flying U-2 spy planes, high-altitude spy planes over the Soviet Union, over Cuba. They took pictures, and he realizes we have missiles there. All right. Ask me about the U-2 and Francis Gary Powers. It's important. Right, Kennedy meets with his advisors for 6 days, and they come out and he surprises Nikita Khrushchev, the premier of the Soviet Union, and says, "Listen, get those missiles out or else. We're blockading Cuba. We're stopping any ship going in or out. We're checking for weapons. I want those missiles out." And he tells the American people this, which takes Khrushchev by surprise. He thought he'd have a little more time, a little more ability to bargain. So for several days, the world's on the edge. It's on the brink of nuclear war. And eventually, like in the game of chicken, the Soviets blinked, and President Kennedy works out a compromise private agreement with Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union. They're going to take their missiles out of Cuba, and in return, we'll take ours from Turkey. Okay, so the Cuban Missile Crisis heightens the threat of nuclear war, and by the 1950s, the Soviets can match us weapon for weapon, missile for missile. Or I don't know how many times you have to be able to kill everyone to feel safe, but we aren't there yet. All right, so the 50s and 60s are really a time of unrest and fear in the U.S. American schools held drills where you get under your desk and hide, put your head between your legs and kiss your butt goodbye in case of nuclear attack. The federal government encourages citizens to build bomb shelters in their basements and backyards, similar to what we do for tornadoes now. And but by the 60s, Vietnam will replace the threat of nuclear war. All right, Kennedy, remind me, I need you to, a couple quotes, very famous quotes from his inaugural address and about his assassination. Okay, let's get that.